Welcome back to Armpit Intellectuals, the podcast where we sweat through the theory, name the violence, and maybe laugh a little while we burn it all down. I'm Zara.
And I am Beloved. Today we are stepping into a furnace, patriarchy, the original colonizer, the architect of our shame, the ghost in our WhatsApp family groups, especially in Pakistan, where it wears a sherwani, quotes hadith selectively, and lives rent-free in the constitution.
Now let's define our terms, because patriarchy isn't just your emotionally unavailable dad or your khala asking when you'll settle down. It's a totalizing system. As Bell Hooks wrote, it is a political social system that insists males are inherently dominating and entitled to rule over the weak and to maintain their dominance through various forms of psychological terrorism and violence. But what's key, and what often gets missed, is that this system isn't just imposed by men. It's enforced by everyone trained to fear its collapse. So yes, that definitely includes women too.
Over there, patriarchy is not a side hustle. It's the central infrastructure of the state. The state and the limitations of gender discourse. Rubina Segal traces how the nation-state was founded through a patriarchal familial metaphor. The father-state as sovereign, the obedient citizen son as subject, and the woman as the embodiment of honor, something to be possessed, protected, and punished.
And this metaphor is not harmless, it's foundational. In fact, during partition, women's bodies became literal battlegrounds, raped, branded, and mutilated as acts of ethnic warfare. Scholars like Urvashi Butalia, Ritu Menon, and Kamla Bhasan document how nationhood was written in blood, often menstrual, maternal. And this violence wasn't collateral, it was constitutive. So, an example of this is that during partition, Sikh women were told to self-immolate, that is, to kill themselves by fathers and brothers to maintain their family's honor, so that they could not be raped and impregnated by the other's men. And using swords, women's bodies were marked with a religious symbol of the other's religion. Imagine.
And today, that legacy continued. Honor, hizr, as we said, is invoked every time a woman is murdered for choosing her own partner. Every time a survivor is silenced or shamed. Every time a trans person is denied a job or simply the right to be. Honor isn't protection, it's surveillance.
And take Kandil Baloch as a great example of this societal surveillance. She wasn't just killed by her brother, she was executed by a society that couldn't tolerate a woman who was sexual, self-authored, and worst of all, unashamed. She was unapologetically herself, and she trolled the system, and of course the system retaliated.
Or Mukhtara Mai, gang raped in retribution for her younger brother's alleged actions. Her body rendered public collateral for communal discipline. Her survival and activism were radical acts, but the feudal patriarchal system that enabled her assault, very much alive.
Right, and then we have Noor Muqaddam, who was murdered for refusing to marry her elite upper-class ex-partner. Similar to what happened to Sana Yusuf earlier this month, a 17-year-old TikTok star who was murdered on her birthday by a man whose romantic advances she had repeatedly rejected. And this is patriarchy's genius. It hides in plain sight. It masquerades as morality, custom, and protection. But it's a machine for producing silence and violence. And nowhere is this more entrenched than the family, or in our husbands and partners, who then, become our families once we're older. The so-called sacred unit of South Asian society. Because patriarchy starts within the home.
Within the home. Let's bring in Jacques Lacan. He speaks of the name of the father, the internalized symbolic lawgiver. In Pakistan, that figure isn't metaphoric. It's your actual father, your imam, your school principal, your commanding officer, your older cousin who presumes an authoritative role in your life, man who claim to know better. The entire national script is an edible fever dream.
Yes, and feminist psychoanalyst Jessica Benjamin offers a counter reading. So she argues that patriarchy distorts intimacy by replacing recognition with control. Instead of I see you, it becomes I own you. So love becomes obedience, protection becomes possession, care becomes coercion. And I guess one could argue that love becomes abuse.
And this distortion isn't ritualized. Sons eat first, daughters serve. Boys inherit land, well, most of it. Girls, while in exceptional cases may inherit the same, often inherit blame. The house itself is structured on hierarchy, not nurture. This didn't right. These aren't quirky desi habits, they're ideological indoctrinations that suggest men are entitled to more, that they are worth more and have more inherent value.
Right, and here's a twist. The gatekeepers of patriarchy are often women, mothers, aunties, even elite influencers. So let's name Mariam B, right, who accused Aurat March participants of being quote unquote immoral and anti Islamic. But as Nida Kirmani explains, women who benefit from proximity to power, especially class and religious power, often defend the status quo to maintain their own place in it. So, rich Pakistani women are the greatest protectors of patriarchy, as are women who believe their religious virtuosity puts them in a more powerful position to claim judgment. I used to make this joke about women like that, like who troll me on social media by asking them, are you God's secretaries? Did Allah put you in charge of administrative duties?
Yeah. So that relates to what Sarah Ahmad calls effective economies, I think. Emotions like shame, disgust, pride, they circulate and stick to bodies. A woman calling another woman besharam isn't just expressing judgment. She's managing the moral economy of the household. Dupatta pehno. It's what maintains her sense of power within patriarchy. By becoming a gatekeeper of the same ideology that has kept her ideologically imprisoned for most of her life.
I mean, yeah, just to add a personal example to that, like growing up after puberty, I guess, like if there was anybody in the house other than even in front of my father, like basically it was just expected that I had to wear a bra at all times. And if someone came in like a male domestic worker, like a driver, like cook or something, I had to wear a shawl on top. So it was just this, and I've written about this before. It's like this self-surveillance, I wouldn't leave my room without thinking can you see the shape of my chest, or is it covered enough?
Yeah.
So it's just kind of wild, that the self-surveillance starts so young in women.
Yeah. That's true.
And so let's take this up a notch and scale up to the state. The Pakistan Army isn't just a defense institution, it's a masculinity factory. In Faith and Feminism in Pakistan, Afia Shehrbano Zia writes that the military produces an ideal male, nationalist, heterosexual, emotionally armored, and violently obedient. The soldier isn't just a role, it's a gender ideal, right? And yes, while there are female soldiers, they are often purveyors of patriarchy themselves or subjected to sexual patriarchal violence within the forces.
And this masculinity is embedded in land. The army owns vast tracts through the Defense Housing Authority.
DHA aunties, what's up?
DHA Phase 8. Literal patriarchal utopias where order, class, and gender are enforced through architecture and surveillance. The walls are high and the security, but so are the stakes.
And the feminized nation, mulk maa hai, right? Even the way
Bharat Mata.
Right, so even the way India refers to itself as Bharat Mata is always under threat. And to protect this so-called mother, real men must silence dissent. And that's why feminists, journalists, and queer organizers are treated not just as critics, but as traitors to the mother, to the motherland.
Enter Aurat March, where a woman chants Mera Jism, Meri Marzi, Kapade Tang Si. It's not just a slogan about worldly autonomy. It's an indictment of the patriarchal nationalist contract. And the state responds accordingly. Slander, surveillance, and sometimes police batons. Your body does not belong to you, is the message.
Yeah, and I think equally as important, we mustn't ignore the economic architecture. So, Taimur Rahman gets at this in the Pakistani context, pointing out that the domestic sphere is treated as apolitical. But in reality, it's where the most coercive forms of labor extraction occur. Not just through gender, but also class, domestic workers, ayahs, cooks, usually women from lower caste or rural backgrounds, enter homes already structured by elite moral hierarchies. They're invisible until they do something wrong, right? And as Silvia Federici argues in Wages Against Housework, capitalism and patriarchy are co-conspirators. The family is not outside of capital. It's one of its most essential production sites. Women's bodies are turned into factories for labor and reproduction, and their exhaustion is the unpaid invoice of the nation state. So the middle-class Pakistani woman might not be employed, but she's still working endlessly. She manages the emotional health of the entire household. She remembers every birthday, boils the milk, makes sure Baba's cholesterol meds are taken on time. And what does she get in return? A plastic rose on Mother's Day, maybe a cake. But also she's likely to reproduce the violence she experiences on the working class women who reproduce labor for them in their homes. So the violence is cyclical. It doesn't end, and nobody is innocent, really, except perhaps the subaltern. But even then, you never know who the subaltern is inflicting violence on. It's a cycle of violence, right? It's a chain reaction. Especially in such a classist society like Pakistan. Sorry to interrupt. What are you saying?
I was just saying, why would the subaltern be not affected by this?
No, of course. No, I'm saying that, the subaltern, if you're right at the bottom of the class chain, who do you have to exhort your violence on? But then, of course, you do it to your children, you do it to, somebody who's more vulnerable than you are. And usually that's children, right? Or even animals. So
that's why working class women are the true frontliners of feminist resistance. Lady health workers demanding contracts, domestic workers fighting for inclusion in labor law, brick kiln workers organizing for fair wages, rural women such as members of the Sindhyani Tehreek practicing Marxism in action without ever having stepped a foot in a post-secondary academic institution. This is not Instagram feminism.
Thank God.
This is the front line of feminist praxis.
Hell yeah.
And this is feminism that deserves to be heard and the message amplified.
You go, girl.
And as Gayatri Spivak reminds us, the subaltern woman is not just silenced. She is made to speak in a voice that is not hers. She must desire what the system desires for her, which is to disappear inside the role of good daughter, dutiful wife, grateful mother.
Right, and just a note on this, an excellent example of this kind of forcing or imposing on, rural women or subaltern women is during the 2022 floods in Sindh. A lot of, urban upper class women were basically saying, the women who are affected by the floods, who are displaced, We need to get them sanitary napkins. We need to go and send them pads. Without even
Oh, yeah.
asking the women
What they
themselves, right? Like, what do you do for menstruation? Because actually, a lot of women, who don't live in urban cities, for example, they use reusable cloths or, cotton, kapra, these kinds of things. I mean, it's so expensive to buy pads, right? Anywhere in the world. Um, I mean, some places I think offer free sanitary, or there's a refund. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But the point is that in Pakistan, obviously, it's not that affordable
Mm.
or accessible. So that's just an example of this idea of like imposing on the subaltern woman, right? Which is really just not okay. And this patriarchy, right? The patriarchy doesn't just take from women; it feeds off them. It's parasitic. It cannot survive without their labor, but it must make sure they never name that labor as work, right? Like, it's like women get married and their job is just to be housewives and have children, reproduce, take care of their children. That's not recognized as a job. That's literally recognized as women's purpose. So many women in Pakistan, that's their purpose. They don't get to have dreams or jobs or hobbies most of the time, right? Many of them. Their entire existence is they are prepared for marriage to a man they may not even have known beforehand, right? I mean, arranged marriages to phir bhi aajkal chal rahe hain, but yeah, I guess if you're from a slightly more urbanized background, like, you can get to know the person a bit before, right? But that's still a very modern concept, I think, to some extent, no?
Mm. Yeah.
And that's it, really. Like, that's your whole identity is built on this idea of shadi bacche or ghar sambhalna, like, and that is of a large segment of Pakistani society. But what of queer and trans Pakistanis, right? The Khwaja Sira community, which predates the modern nation, once held spiritual and cultural roles, like they were revered in society. But colonialism criminalized them through the 1871 Criminal Tribes Act, and independence, quote unquote, did not liberate them. It repackaged that erasure in national moralism.
The 2018 Trans Protection Act offered hope. Even the 2018 Trans March and the Sindhi Word March that have followed since sparked hope too. I think it's Sindh Murad March. But the recent backlash
Yes.
supported by religious groups reflects what Gayatri Spivak again called the reinscription of colonial modernity, a state that demands legibility through binary gender and punishes ambiguity as chaos.
And when the state reacts, it isn't just with violence, it's with invisibility. So trans people are excluded from the census, denied public services even, and erased from mainstream narratives. As Shanila Khoja Moolji notes, gender non-conformity threatens the very ontological security of the nation state. Ontological matlab, the whole, like, structure of the state, how the state is compromised. So, what the structure of the state in that, gender non-conformity, like, it just goes against how the state is structured, right? On this sense of religious, gendered, domestic obedience.
So, what does this resistance actually look like?
Well, I mean, it looks like a protest, yes, definitely, but it could also look like a zine in a college dorm, giving out flyers, educational flyers. It's a refusal to apologize for, your rage, a decision not to get married, or a decision to travel abroad as a woman, even if your parents try to stop you. A trans person staying alive, honestly, that is resistance in our society. A man choosing not to hit his son, a woman refusing to shame her daughter the same way she was. Resistance is as much internal as external. And yet, naming it is the first rupture, saying this is not love, this is extraction. That's the beginning of rebellion. When women begin to name what has been stolen from them, time, dreams, sleep, youth, agency, the whole myth of domestic bliss begins to tremble. So maybe the revolution starts in the laundry room, in the refusal to iron a shirt, in the decision to not get up first to make the tea, in the audacity of saying, I am not your maid, and I am not your moral sponge. I am tired. And this refusal of doing anything that one does not want to do against their will, one that does not want to follow a script any longer, or, give in to this idea of blind loyalty as we do with religion and the state.
That's deep, yeah, that's right. Bell Hooks wrote, "To be loving is to be open to breathe. Patriarchy teaches us to suppress, not mourn, to harden, not heal. But liberation asks us to feel the ache, to make room for sorrow, and in that space, new stories. Stories that would liberate not only us, but future generations too. More Pakistanis telling themselves, this stops with us. No more violence, no more oppression." I mean, it's true for India or Bangladesh, or even true, patriarchy is worldwide, so.
Right, of course. But I suppose as Pakistanis, we are more equipped to give personal examples of our own
Personal
society.
example, yeah.
I mean, while
South
of course,
Asia more, but we cannot talk more.
definitely.
The rest of the world.
Right,
Yeah, but-
exactly. Although, patriarchy does exist in the West too, right? It's just in a more subtle form, I guess. It's not so overt. It gives you
Yeah.
this idea of women's rights, and while women do have more freedom of movement and things like that, I think patriarchy is a bit more embedded here in a very structural way, not so much in a socio-cultural or religious way
Right.
as much. But yeah, that's really lovely, right? It's more of us, Pakistanis, Indians, Bangladeshis. I mean, yeah, all these societies, all of our societies are structured in very similar patriarchal ways, right? However, within our societies, there are, small communities that are matriarchal, right? I know that in South India, there are communities like that. While it's obviously not the mainstream narrative. But I guess, there's a sense of mourning to this. And Sara Ahmed speaks about it in her paper, Killing Joy, where she says that when you become a feminist, there's a sense of mourning to it. Because you are mourning the possibilities. Because once you sort of acknowledge feminism and start to identify with feminism, you have to let go of a lot of opportunities that you could have had, because patriarchy sells women the idea of happiness, which is, shadi karo, get married, have children, you're gonna be the happiest you could possibly be. And of course, that's a lie, right? That's not true. It's just a script that's written for women by patriarchy. And so when you become a feminist, what Sara Ahmed says is that once you become a feminist, you will mourn, because you will have lost so much privilege that you could have had otherwise if you followed the script. So maybe resistance is mourning, right? The grief of the daughter who was never allowed to be loud, right? Who was shamed for speaking loudly. I know I'm one of those people. The grief of the son who was never allowed to cry. Right? The amount of guys I just grew up with who said yeah, I haven't cried since first grade. I'm bro, what? That is nothing to be proud of. I'm sorry, but or the grief of a queer couple who never had a name for their love, right? Who could never actually love openly, right? And the grief of the child who was raped and couldn't tell a single soul. And when they did, they were denied their grief. The grief of the woman who is a victim of domestic violence and has nowhere else to go because she has never known what freedom could be.
So if you're listening to this, ask yourself, what myths did I inherit? Whose voice is lodged inside me? What would it mean to let that voice go? You weren't born to protect someone else's empire or their fragile masculinity.
And you weren't born to fold yourself into a version that pleases the anti-industrial complex.
That's creative. You weren't born to worship at the altar of the father state.
Hell yeah, you tell them, man. But I will tell you what you were born to do. You were born to write your own story. Even if your hands are shaking.
You've been listening to Armpit Intellectuals. If this episode stirred something, share it with your friend, your cousin, your therapist, your nanny, your gym bro.
You bitchy purple.
Until then, stay curious, stay furious, and keep sniffing the armpits of empire.